2, injection attacks inside the threat of our webinar series. The heat is on, why OTPs can't handle today's threats. We have a full agenda again for the next 30 minutes. So I wanted to go over some quick house rules and then we'll get started. So we are recording this session. We will send the recording out after we're done. Feel free to take notes, but just wanted to let you know that you will have access to the full recording afterwards. And just like last week, we encourage the session to be engaging. So please utilize the Q&A for any relevant questions that you have or comments, and we will dedicate time towards the end of this to address them. So let's look at our agenda. So we're going to be covering the following. I'm going to go over some injection attacks and show some examples. Also talk about why they matter and how they matter for certain industries, and then countermeasures for defeating them. And then, like I said, we'll end with some Q&A. So now I'd like to introduce our two industry experts for this series. First up is Dale DeGaro. He's Vice President of Solution Consultant at authID with over 20 years of experience in identity verification, authentication, and cybersecurity. He'll be sharing his expert and practical insights on deepfake injection attacks, how they work, and why they're rapidly becoming a top security threat, and go over the strategies organizations can use to defend against them. And Dale is joined by Steve Craig. He is our head of servicing strategy here at Proof. He spent the last 20 years building digital products, and the past decade has focused on solving really tough problems in identity verification, biometrics, and authentication. So without further ado, Steve, I will pass it to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Kelly. Dale, it's so good to see you on a webinar format. How are you today?
Absolutely. Finally, we get together after many, many years of trying to make it happen. Glad we can make it
Yeah, I
finally.
think I've known you over 4 years now, so I'm really excited to co-present with you on this topic. As Kelly mentioned, we've got a full agenda, so I think we should just get right into the content and talk about injection attacks. I'd love it if you could share with the audience your expert knowledge around the differences between, let's say, presentation attacks and injection attacks and the anatomy of this. Can you kick off with that?
Absolutely. Love to kind of walk through basically the playbook of a fraudster and how they would conduct this attack. So let's kind of dive right into it. As if I were to act as a fraudster, how do I attack a system, whether that be for digital account opening or enrollment for day one and beyond authentication? And the way I'd start this attack is, try to attempt to spoof a biometric. And if it's account opening, combine it with an ID document spoof as well. And the attack that I think most of us in the audience are familiar with is this category called the presentation attack. And just by way of volume, this is probably going to be the bulk of the attack, Steve. 90% is what we see come through volume at any given day. But what's weird, not weird, but I guess alarming is that this is decreasing because it's becoming replaced with another attack, which we'll get into. But the presentation attack is effectively the easier attack, the lazy one. If I take Steve's ID leaked in a data breach, print out a copy of it, or put it on my monitor or my laptop screen, or even go so far as to create a mask of you. And when prompted to, simply take the camera and put it at one of those three assets. And that's your classic presentation attack. Now, any good solution will have a countermeasure to this. This is sort of well defined by ISO presentation attack detections levels 1 and level 2. Neural net will see the screen door effect, which would denote screen replay. Neural net might see color space separation. So the entirety of the color spectrum, maybe we only see a subset of that. That would denote that this is potentially a printed copy. And, the solution that we have stops this 100%. And quite candidly, so do many other solutions. I think this is a well-solved, well-defined problem by now. The second attack, this is the growing attack. So it's growing by the day, and this is the one that's problematic for many solutions. Steve, if you, me, Kelly, Donna, members of our audience, we all got in a room in a post-fraud investigation, we would probably miss this attack. And this is the attack that includes the category of the deepfake. This includes circulation of stolen biometrics, circulation of stolen ID credentials that have been leaked in data breaches. This also includes like the 3D renders, the face morphs, and the face swaps. And there's a lot of like different attack surfaces that this persists across, unlike the aforementioned presentation attack, which is, an easy problem to solve by now. It's happening across the spectrum of hardware, software, and the network. And each of these bullet points goes like many levels deep. And it's important to develop countermeasures that will stop this. As we think about developing a pipeline or strategy to counter this attack, it has to be multifaceted. The first kind of approach to stopping this is to attempt to stop it in a very deterministic way. And this is the injection attack, like thinking about this as a security measure to detect this in a very binary way. Did someone violate a security measure or did they not? And that's easily the best way to do it. However, like as we all know in security, there's no sort of finish line to this, right? Like there's no way to kind of find, detect, and trap every single one. So what we have to do is create a secondary countermeasure that looks at this in a more probabilistic nature that will analyze the asset itself and look for anomalous artifacts that would denote it was artificially generated, injected, or the classic deepfake as well.
Fascinating.
Yeah. And just to kind of give the audience like a real visual example of this, here's a sample of 3 fraudsters that have been anonymized. And these 3 different fraudsters came in with 3 different sets of PII, presumably could have passed like an identity graph passive verification check, checked out from a CIP, checked out from like a fraud risk perspective, and then asserted their biometric. What we were able to uncover for a prospect was that these were not actually 3 different fraudsters. These were, in fact, the same fraudster. And what they had done was stolen the ID credentials of 3 different victims in this case. And what they had done, Steve, was taken that biometric either from that credential or found them online or from social presence and took that likeness and overlaid it into themselves for 2 reasons, really. One, to biometrically match back to the credential. Oftentimes, the classic pattern of IDV is to take your selfie, compare it to your government issued ID, and match it. And this was enough to kind of perform that match. The other reason was to pass some rudimentary liveness detection checks that are done in that acquisition of that biometric for that enrollment. And that usually involves, blinking and smiling, looking left and right, maybe flashing lights at that person asserting that identity. And they can accomplish this very easily. Um, and like the solution that we've had to develop, I talked about like the multi-pipelines in that countermeasure. One of these countermeasures is to look at this in a probabilistic nature and assign like a deepfake score. So even if we missed that very deterministic security violation that would have happened at the injection layer, we can then waterfall out to a more probabilistic measure to tell us, could that have been a deepfake? And as I mentioned at the top, I wanted to make this kind of a treat for the audience and actually show this in practice and not just like talk about this in any sort of theoretical way. So I really want to impress upon the audience like this is not something that's hard to do, out of reach. And when you see this come through your LinkedIn feeds, you kind of like appreciate it a little bit, but a lot of this can be post-rendered. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen really quick. Can you see my face again, Steve?
Yes, I can.
Excellent. So what I'd love to do is kind of morph in real time into someone completely different. And let's see if we can pull this off. I will have you check your eyes and then look again and see if you can see my face again.
Well, hello, Roger. How are you today?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. And in this case, we just did a live face swap into Roger Desai, CEO of Prove. Apologies, Roger. Didn't mean to impersonate you, all in the name of research and security. But, as I mentioned, like you see this technique come through on LinkedIn, you'll see people perform this. And I might have like went through the effort of training a model off of Roger's face. That is very doable. But what happens if like you're trying to deepfake a victim that isn't as well known as Roger Desai? And so we'll do that live on the webinar right now. So Steve, if you don't mind, hold steady. I'd love to kind of take a screenshot of your face. All right, perfect. I got it. So I'm going to turn off Roger. We'll pause Roger for a second, and we'll turn on an impersonation of Steve, and I'll swap into Steve really quick here. And if we
Oh,
come back now, we've got that live impersonation
mhm.
of Steve Craig, the one and only. Not as good
It
looking,
looks it looks
but
pretty close there, Dale. It's like my evil cousin,
right.
perhaps.
Some version of Steve.
Yeah,
The
I'll say
ultimate.
the beards are deep fake defensible. I don't know if it's got the beard right, but it's
Yeah.
very powerful, Dale.
We'll check out the face, pinch the cheeks, and I just wanted to share that. Like, this is a pretty simple impersonation attack off of a single screenshot. So as you can imagine, this becomes increasingly more realistic with a little bit more processing time. And just to kind of share the screen back into the field of view, again, I just wanted to share not as a means to teach people how to commit this fraud, but to kind of show you what does it take to kind of pull this type of technique off. And here we have tooling like OBS that we can use. This is the tool that we use to kind of screenshot you. This is that screenshot that you posed very nicely for me. This is the morph into you off of my camera feed. And this is ultimately the tool that I would use to inject that asset into the Zoom call or employment interview. And just to kind of give you a preview for the next session, where we'll teach you how to actually not teach you, but show you the security measures that people go through. This is a way that one would use a tool like this to inject a stolen asset. Let's say in this case, a driver's license into a digital account opening flow. We'll do that for the front, the back of the ID, and as well, take a deep fake of that victim and push that through for that account opening. Um, but scary stuff. This is the world we live in. These are the countermeasures that we have to develop to protect against this new emerging threat, and simply how easy it is to deepfake and inject that into a flow.
Yeah, that was really powerful, Dale, especially when you're doing it live with me. We've now set the foundation for what is an injection attack, the anatomy of it. We're about at the midway point in the webinar. Our next section is really why should you care? If you're on this webinar, you're interested in this topic, we have a number of attendees that are in financial services and fintech, marketplaces, et cetera. We're going to highlight two of the very frequently targeted verticals. The first one is fintech and financial services. Fraudsters typically are going where the money is, where they can take over accounts and get a payday. But there's also another area that gets attacked, which is the remote workforce and remote hiring. We'll talk about both of these in the next few moments. Let's go into the next slide. For fintech and financial services, Dale, I know you work with a lot of companies in the space. You and I have both been in the identity industry for many years. Some of the attack vectors that we're seeing from fintech are, of course, account takeover attempts and onboarding, but wire transfer scams, being able to take control of assets. What are some of the other attacks that you're seeing? And then what's the impact to the end consumer and to the bank or the fintech?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like, the bullet point that you have there is one that actually hits pretty home for me. It happened to a family member in a very extravagant way. Like, the average fraud loss in that category probably could range in anywhere between 40 to $70,000. And that scam, it's wild because let's say I was to run that scam on Steve Craig. If I were to gain the credentials to your account, I won't initiate any sort of like high stakes transfer. I'll text message you and I'll say, "Hey, Steve, did you initiate a wire transfer?" Reply back, "Yes." for yes, or Y for yes, N for no. And of course, in a frantic rush, you'll probably reply back N for no. And at that moment, I've got you, right? You reply back no, spoof the fraud department's phone number, call you on your mobile device, and say, Steve, I'm glad we caught this. Our like passive measures detected an anomaly. Happy to cancel this for you. I'm just going to send you a one-time PIN really quick to allow me to cancel it for you. And in that case, fraudster starts to initiate that high stakes transfer. Once you read back that OTP back to me, then we've got you. And sadly, if I'm like a good enough actor as a fraudster, I can convince you to do this over and over again by saying that one didn't work. Let's just try it one more time before you start to like wake up. And that is one that is like very personal to me because it happened to a family member. And this type of like countermeasure is required to kind of stop this sort of like phishing attempt that is so easily done through the existing like OTPs that we're describing in big ways. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
social engineering process is happening all over the industry.
there's like no shortage of stories. Like I feel like I get a new storyline around that exact fraud case on a weekly basis. And the calls happen like also like on a weekly basis. Actually, I just had a discussion yesterday about this at a large credit union. So it's definitely top of mind. They're scrambling where they're like at a certain basis point level for
Mhm.
fraud losses. They're beginning to exceed those fraud losses for the calendar year, and they're trying to find countermeasures to it.
Yeah, yeah. Before we go on to the next one, the demo you showed where you highlighted the document piece, a lot of times the recovery process is to step up to a document and a selfie, but you've just shown that you could very easily face morph. You could present a recording of a document that was probably deep faked, and you can inject those and bypass a lot of those presentation attack defenses that have been set up. Let's
Yeah.
go into the next one though, because this one has been pretty pretty frequently posted about on LinkedIn and other areas, which is this remote hiring. We often hear about this in the context of rogue nation states, like there's the North Korean bad actors that are infiltrating companies. The attack vectors here typically are doing exactly what you just did to me. You get the face and you join a Zoom and you're now pretending to be that person. What are some of the other attack vectors that you're seeing specifically in the onboarding of contractors or remote workers, et cetera? Curious about your perspective there.
Yeah, yeah. And that one's also like very personal because it actually happened to me at a prior place of employment. I used to work for a professional services firm, and we we interviewed a guy remotely, knocked it out of the park, Steve. Excellent interviewer, all remote because we're all like distributed now. And we onboarded this individual, hired, they obtained a trusted device, an authorized laptop. They got their RSA tokens. They got all of their auto questions for security recovery. That person did the job for months before we did an on-site QBR. We go to this on-site QBR and all of us look around and we're like, who is that individual? And by name, that was the person that we originally interviewed. But by interaction clearly wasn't. And they were able to pull this scam off because they obtained the trusted device knowledge to authenticate on a daily basis. Did excellent work, just wasn't the person that was vetted, onboarded, and went through like all of our security training. And thankfully, it didn't result in anything like nefarious that would lead to like nation state uh, secrets being leaked or company secret, trade secrets being leaked out to competitors, at least not that we know of. But it was a very interesting experience to kind of see it happen in real life because the authentication patterns often rely on something you have, something you know, and that's easily like lifted and shifted onto some other individual.
Yeah. Well,
And like,
what do you see as far as impacts though, Dale, beyond that's a great example. But what are some of the challenges and what are they actually doing when they're trying to be nefarious?
yeah, I mean, in our case, thankfully, not that serious, but in other cases that we're seeing with our competitors or customers that are looking for this solution, they're they're afraid that their trade secrets are being leaked. They're afraid that actors can move high stakes transactions, gain access to privileged areas within the organization, and ultimately wreak havoc within the enterprise. So it's going to that point of where like people are just trying to get a job to now potentially nation state actors trying to penetrate enterprises and ultimately make their way at a government level as well.
Right, right. Yeah, the ability for someone in another country, in a country that's not friendly to, the US or other Western allies trying to infiltrate to steal code or to put Trojan horses in, or what we've seen with hospitals and casinos, like the ransomware to take down entire infrastructure. I think anyone who's on this webinar who works with remote colleagues or contractors, I think this is a really important part of the problem that needs to be solved. All right, time check. We've got about 10 minutes left. I'd love to go into some of the countermeasures that you're seeing in the market that companies try on their own. And the first most logical one, given these are a lot of times that device centric, is device integrity. So what do you see from a device integrity standpoint, Dale, on what companies are trying to do?
Yeah, so device is an interesting thing. Like when you think about the broad landscape of devices that are available, web, desktop, laptop, native devices, naturally the native device is probably going to be the most secure because it becomes difficult to kind of like intercept some of those signals. And naturally that becomes like the first thing, like, hey, let's push everything to native. Um, the problem with that is when you're trying to develop an authentication pattern that's accessible to the broad scope of users across a landscape of different like channels, you have to kind of extend beyond that. So like what we've had to develop is a solution that is just as protective across like native as it is on like the broader channels like web. And like that strategy to kind of force it into native like kind of works in the absence of those solutions, but limits like your reach. And our goal is always to kind of create an authentication mechanism, an onboarding mechanism that is as inclusive and distributed as possible so that you can perform that recovery on any device that's not device agnostic without those like hard requirements. So, like the strategy started out is like just pushing the native, and that works. But then as you kind of extend beyond that, finding a solution to kind of protect against those other branches is key.
Yeah. I mean, the highlight of native leads to our next bullet, which is to do some level of camera analysis. When you look at the mobile ecosystem, you've got a set number of iOS devices, but the Android ecosystem is vast with different hardware permutations and lens types. And then when you support desktop workflows and web, you deal with webcam. So what are some things you've seen or looked at yourself around the actual camera analysis of resolutions or apertures or other things that could give you telltale signs that this doesn't match up with the expectation?
Yeah. I mean, this ties, nicely back into device as well. So like looking at the sensor and the integrity of that sensor, the challenges that we face now is, like something as simple as what we walked through today was a virtual camera through OBS, right? And that detection mechanism, pretty simple, could be like a named camera, falls off of like an approved list. But that's a simple like countermeasure. Like as a fraudster, you can kind of rename your cameras. Like, are those sensors actually real? Are they tampered with? Are they virtual? And you start to face challenges with like new hardware devices where that manipulation is happening at the manufacturer level. And like you've got cameras that have like built-in filters that might smooth out your face. But obviously that technique can be used to kind of do other techniques for an impersonation purpose. And those challenges become even greater as the technology evolves, as people crave like different lens technology. Sometimes you don't even know if what you're seeing is real. Like how real is it when a lot of post-processing is happening directly from that chipset. So it's definitely challenging, and this is where you have to develop those other techniques that don't necessarily create a false positive because that's just the way that device came, versus one where someone intentionally manipulated the feed and discredited the integrity of that asset that was acquired.
Great insight. Let's touch on the very last one, which is the deepfake detection itself. There are a number of solutions in the market that I see as more like point solutions that are trying to detect a very specific thing, like a face morph or a face swap. How do you think about the state of the art for deepfake detection and deepfake pipelines, and where do companies struggle to get the right result out of seeing if that injected image is truly deepfake or just some zoom filter, as an example?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is I'm so glad you had this because this is like a critical piece. Like you try to solve this at the security layer as we kind of stepped through earlier, because the best way is to kind of just detect that security violation. Was it injected? Was it a device integrity issue? Was it missing a signature in that asset that was acquired that would indicate some sort of man in the middle? This is your waterfall in the event that you didn't set a trap for every single known security violation. And you have to run this in that pipeline as that final waterfall step in the analysis. So like in that defect detection, as you mentioned, this is challenging because like there are some defects, you can see them, visible artifacts as we kind of walked it through. If we got in a room and we looked at them, we might have been able to say, hey, like that looked very suspicious, especially between the face and the background fall off. And that would be an artifact that maybe some of us could detect. And this technology is not stopping. Like every iteration of this tends to get better. Even in that tool that I walked you through, we're getting resolution improvements. We're getting frame rate improvements. If I ran this on like a higher end machine, that would start to become indiscernible. So, it's something that you have to keep an eye on because like what we're doing is measuring those artifacts, both visible and invisible. And as you know from our past life, you set your fraud thresholds based off of ground truth. And as that evolves, that may shift to kind of find that perfect intersection between true fraud versus like a false positive. And it's something that is always evolving and something that we're looking at on a daily, weekly, monthly basis.
This has been great, Dale. We've got just a few moments left. I want to leave time for Q&A. The last slide that we want to share is just to connect the previous webinar that Dan Kilmer and Jeff Scheidel had presented about the partnership. And at Prove and along with authID, we believe that more signals, especially when they're corroborated and connected, are more powerful to prevent onboarding attacks, authentication attacks, to combat some of these OTP phishing and social engineering scams. So from Prove's perspective, we have the Pro model: possession, reputation, and ownership. We can supercharge that with things like phone tenure, device behavior. authID brings presence. It brings document verification, biometric authentication, and all the things we talked today about, from presentation attacks to injection attacks to being able to prevent the fraudster from actually exploiting some of these attacks and providing a very holistic countermeasure, is what we bring together. So Kelly, that's it for program. I think if you've got some questions brewing, I'll hand it back to you to enter the Q&A portion, and we can stay on to take those.
Yeah, definitely. That was great, guys. I know there's some comments too, Dale, when you were showing the injection attack. People were commenting mind blown. So some good stuff there. So yeah, I want to start with this question, Dale. How is Face ID different from Auth ID?
Yeah, great question because, by intention, we designed it to kind of feel like Face ID. Thank you to Apple and Google for kind of making biometric authentication commonplace. So we try to mimic that as much as possible, but there's a very key fundamental difference between the two. When you think about Face ID, that biometric enrollment event happens by the user themselves outside of the purview of that relying party or that banking institution or that employer. Self-enrolled, and they enroll specifically and exclusively on that device and that device only outside of that institution's knowledge. The authID biometric is the opposite of that. The participation of that enrollment event happens exclusively with that relying party or that banking institution or that employer, and therefore becomes the true biometric of the account owner. And what that means in a very practical sense is that that biometric becomes the root of trust. That biometric can be extended beyond just that singular device that it was enrolled upon. And high stakes transactions, money movement, account recovery can happen on that personal device, on a newly acquired device, on a shared kiosk device, and even extend into a call center as that true account owner authentication.
Great. And let's do one more. So let's see. Steve, where does document verification fit into the authentication workflows?
Document verification, generally for authentication, sits in recovery phases. So if you've gone through and you've failed for whatever reason, that's when you would deploy that again. Some companies, when there are very high risk transactions, they may choose to deploy that. But typically, you're seeing documents and biometrics more upfront in the onboarding phase. But having flexibility and being able to design these workflows is part of this partnership. The product or solution that I'm working on, unified authentication, which just was press released today, is designed in a way that we put the right authentication method at the right time. And so it can be used depending on really the use case and need.
Awesome. Well, we are up for time. So if anyone does have any other questions, please feel free to email back once we send out some follow-up emails and we can address personally. But hope you guys had, this was a great conversation. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Dale. Thank you everyone for joining us. Reminder, we have our last session of our series next week. So next Tuesday at 1 p.m. where Dan will come back and he will give a live demo of unified authentication, our new solution offering that Steve just announced that we launched today. So thank you again, guys, and we will send out the recording shortly after this. Hope everyone has a good day.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.